But you know, they have to build the repeaters or towers have to be a little bit closer. 5G, I've heard, it's got problems going through walls.
You're going to build that little, the sort of local trains you see in the current campus. You're going to build these local trains. Yeah, like there'll be some light poles.
I mean, they've already experimented in, I think, Austin, Texas.
Right. What's it good in this little micro town?
So that Trump claiming the AT&T $1 billion thing, investing.
Well, that's cool.
Focus, right? They were going to do that anyway because of 5G.
Yeah, but I mean, they don't do anything. Yeah, you know that.
Jim? See, he's from our house days.
Exactly, way back when.
Hey, Jim. Thanks for the work.
Okay. He's here. All right.
Yeah, that's good.
Hello, I want to thank you all for being here today. We're each going to speak for about 1 to 2 minutes, and then we're happy to take some questions at the end. We have a really important week coming up, some really important votes tomorrow here in the House. We're going to vote on a bill that will reauthorize FISA 702, which has been used to collect, store, search on Americans without a warrant. We think that is unconstitutional, hugely problematic, and we're here to defend the rights of the American people. I'm honored to offer an amendment that was introduced by Senator Wyden and Senator Paul, and introduced here in the House by Representative Lofgren and Representative Poe. It's called the USA Rights Act. And it's an amendment that will allow the government to continue its surveillance for foreign intelligence, but will provide for a protection when searching on Americans, so that when they want to collect and use data on Americans, they have to get a warrant. This is an amendment that's getting a lot of momentum. We've added a lot of co-sponsors over the last several days. We feel like we have a great opportunity tomorrow to pass this amendment on the House floor, to make a difference for the American people, to stand up for the Constitution. And our amendment stands for the simple proposition that when you want to spy on Americans, get a warrant. So with that, I want to thank you for being here, and I want to welcome Senator Wyden to the stand.
Congressman, thank you. And if you just look at the group up here, I feel like I'm running with the right crowd. And from the Senate, you have 2 Democratic senators, and you have 2 Republican senators, and I think the House is pretty much in the same place. And this is a group that's dedicated to the proposition of showing that it's possible for the American people to have policies that promote both security and liberty. We understand that those two are not mutually exclusive. It is possible to have both. And I'm just going to use my minute or two to give you a sense of what is on the line here. Both of the Intelligence Committee bills, we're talking about the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee, allow for substantial, warrantless, backdoor searches of the communications of law-abiding Americans. And what this means, and I've been on the Intelligence Committee, I'm sort of the Methuselah, and we have the ranking member, Congressman Nadler here. What this essentially means is that every year, thousands of times, you have the government search for the communications of Americans in 702 databases. And we think this is an end run on the Constitution. We understand that there are threats overseas, foreign targets, people we have to be concerned about to protect the safety of the American people. What we're against is, without a warrant, having the communications of law-abiding Americans swept up in that process. And by the way, there is a lot of nonsense being circulated by opponents of the House effort, and they were the same arguments, for example, that came up in the Senate bill. One I am really stunned to hear about is that somehow what House and Senate reformers are doing, we're interested in giving new rights to terrorists. We're not interested in prosecuting, criminals. I can tell you, having been on the Intelligence Committee for 17 years, the government has never once said it needed 702 for typical crimes. So I'm really pleased to be part of this coalition in the Senate, Senator Paul, Senator Tester, Senator Daines, and myself, and great to be with all the folks from the House as well.
Hi, I'm Jerry Nadler. I'm the new ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. I'm going to be very brief because I've got to get down to the start of the markup. Let me just say that the bill before us is wholly unacceptable. It basically takes the approach that, with very few exceptions, you can use Section 702 information for domestic crimes without a warrant. There's a warrant requirement, but very rarely kicks in, and only very late in the process. The Amash Amendment, which has been made in order, is far, far preferable. We will support it. And if it's adopted, wonderful. If not, we'll see where we go from there. But the bill, as stands, is completely unacceptable for reasons I'm sure you'll hear from all the other people here. I don't have time now. I've got to get back to my first markup as ranking member. So thank you very much, and thank all of you for participating in this battle for our rights.
Thanks to Senator Wyden and Rep. Nadler, and I want to welcome Senator Paul.
We need more oversight of the intelligence community, not less. Madison said that men are not angels, and that's why we have the Constitution. That's why we have these rules, to make sure that political bias doesn't enter into it. We've had accusations recently of maybe bias at the FBI, maybe bias at the Justice Department. We need to make sure, because men are not angels, that there are rules. We allow information to be gathered on foreigners in foreign lands without the Constitution. Most of us are okay with that. The Constitution really isn't guaranteed to everyone around the world. It's guaranteed to us here. But the thing is when you gather information from foreigners in foreign lands without the Constitution, that information is not gathered with constitutional protections and should never be used against Americans. This is a bedrock principle of our country. It's what brings Republicans and Democrats together, is that the Bill of Rights requires that information be gathered under the Fourth Amendment with probable cause, naming the person, naming the papers. So we want the Constitution to apply to Americans. In Section 702, we don't know because they won't tell us, but we believe there are millions of pieces of information on Americans in that database. That should not be looked at without a warrant, but even with a warrant, should not be used for domestic crime. This should be about terrorism, about foreigners and foreign intelligence. I think we've got a great chance here. We've got a great coalition, and my hope is that the Amash Amendment will pass and that it will come to the Senate. We'll have a chance there. Thank you.
I'm Zoe Lofgren from California. You know, this is an important day for the Congress and for the country. This is a collection of people who may not agree on everything, but we do agree on the Constitution. When we take our oath of office, we don't say we'll protect and defend the Constitution when it's convenient, when it suits us. We say we're going to protect the Constitution. And that's what this is about. Section 702 permits the collection of information about Americans, and it's not metadata, it's content. We can't talk about the scope of the collection because it's classified, but I will say this, it is a lot of information. A lot of information, and because of the architecture of the internet, it is vast amounts of information, content, phone calls, images, videos, emails of Americans. You want to search that? you need a warrant. And I think this amendment is essential. Thank you.
So thanks, Senator Paul and Rep. Lofgren. I now want to welcome Rep. Ted Poe.
Thank you, Justin. I'm Ted Poe. I'm from Texas. I'm a former judge, and I am very concerned about that sacred document, the Constitution and the Fourth Amendment, the right of privacy of Americans. We are at a point now where the assault on the Fourth Amendment by the intel folks is at a crisis. And I say that because most Americans have never heard of 702. What in the world are we talking about? It's very simple. A law allows for the seizure of information of foreign terrorists and foreign agents operating overseas. And it's to go after those bad guys. But data is seized on Americans. And it is a lot of data. And I say that because the Intel Committee, the Justice Department, after numerous requests by the Judiciary Committee, how many times is that data, conversations, texts, emails, photographs, everything, how many times is that searched on Americans? They will not tell us. They refuse to tell us. And to me, it sounds like they're using that information a lot. And they're not doing it under Fourth Amendment guidelines. They search it without a warrant. There's actually two searches. There's a search to see who's in there. Then they call that a query. That's a search. And then there's a second search that goes in and actually seizes the information. And what they do with it, we don't know. But it's in violation of the Fourth Amendment. So if you want to do that, if government wants to invade the privacy of Americans, then follow the Constitution. Get a warrant from a real judge stating probable cause, and then go search that information. Otherwise, don't search the information at all. It's an interesting phenomenon that has occurred, because normally, when I was a judge, and most judges, a warrant is brought to them to search. After the search, then they seize the material. Under 702, the items have already been seized by government. Then they want to come back and search it. And under this amendment that was first introduced in October of last year, several of us introduced that, and that is now part of the made an order in the House, follow the Constitution. The right of privacy is sacred. Most countries don't have the Fourth Amendment, but we do. It's a constitutional crisis if we allow this legislation to pass where Americans can have their information seized by government under the current proposed legislation in the House and the Senate. So all of us, and we are a strange group of folks in a way because we don't agree on a lot of things, but on the Constitution, we all agree on that. So let's protect it. Let's pass this amendment that has been made ruled in order in the House of Representatives.
Thank you to Rep. Poe, and I want to welcome Senator Daines.
Thanks, Justin. Senator Paul referenced James Madison and the quoting that men are not angels. I think as we've been watching Washington, D.C., the American people are very aware of that, of what's been going on in this city for the last several years. In response to the attack, 9/11, on American citizens and the values our nation stands for, the U.S. government has changed its way. It tracks down terrorists. Section 702, FISA, is one of these changes, which allows the government to monitor certain conversations on the internet and on phones without warrant. Congress intended these changes to promote the safety of the American people and their freedom, but not to diminish it. Montanans should be able to talk on the phone, to send messages to their friends and loved ones without fearing the government will collect data on these private conversations. The 702 program is an important tool to prevent future terrorist attacks, but it is a very powerful tool and must not be used at the expense of the Americans' privacy and their civil liberties. We need strong oversight. We need strong reforms to prevent it from being misused. The USA Rights Act makes these necessary reforms and make strides towards protecting the privacy of the American people. We have a responsibility to make sure the privacy of the American people is protected. It would be irresponsible and a breach of our duty to rush reauthorization of the program through Congress. Without careful oversight, without accountability, the power of this magnitude is too easily abused. That's why we must do our due diligence in debating this program and make sure it does not stomp on Fourth Amendment rights.
Thanks, Senator Daines, and I'd like to now welcome Senator Tester.
Thank you, Justin. It's great to be here. I want to tell you, as you've probably already figured out, this is about protecting law-abiding citizens' privacy. That's what it's about. When the terrorists attacked the United States and continue to try to, some in our bodies said, you know what, privacy doesn't matter. We'll just sacrifice it. Thus the advent of searches without a judge's authorization. That's wrong. The USA Rights Act will fix that. And I will tell some of you might say, well, you know, people aren't talking about this. I'm going to tell you, in Montana, people are talking about this. I met with some high school kids from Kalispell, Montana last weekend. The second question they asked me was about the Fourth Amendment. People are concerned. They're very concerned, and we need to be able to protect our citizenry, but we also need to protect the privacy of the law-abiding citizens in this country. The USA Rights Act is the right way to do it. Justin, I hope you get that amendment put on the bill today or tomorrow or whenever it comes up. And as Rand said, then it falls on the Senate side, and we've got a lot of R's and D's up here, and getting a hold of Senator McConnell to make sure we get a good vote on this is going to be critically important moving forward. This is an important issue, and the time has come to say, look, just follow the law, follow the Constitution.
Thanks, Senator Tester. And now I'd like to welcome Rep. Jordan.
Thank you. History is clear. Government's tendency over time is to infringe on liberty. That's why you have constitutions. That's why you have a Bill of Rights. That's why you have the rule of law. And think about the context that we find ourselves in today in this, the greatest country ever, where you saw an IRS systematically target people for their political beliefs. We've had all kinds of concerns at the Justice Department, the FBI, about potential abuse of power there. That is why you need the Amash Amendment on this legislation, and why I am proud to stand with this bipartisan, bicameral group in defense of the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, those principles that make us the greatest nation in history.
Thanks, Rep. Jordan. And now I want to welcome Rep. Ted Lieu.
Thank you. Having served on active duty in the Air Force, when it comes to foreign terrorists, I believe we need to track them down and kill them. All of us here are fine with using the awesome powers of our intelligence community to spy on foreigners on foreign soil. But when it comes to spying on Americans, if you want to use those extraordinary powers, you've got to follow the Constitution, which means you need a warrant, and that's why I'm a proud co-author of Rep. Amash's amendment. And at the end of the day, this is very simple. All of us here, before we could become members of Congress, all the agency heads, before they could assume their positions, had to do one thing: take an oath to the Constitution. So if a governmental program is unconstitutional, government cannot execute it. Full stop.
Thanks, Rep. Lieu. And now I welcome Rep. Davidson.
Thank you all. Thanks for helping us call attention to this really vital issue. And it's really the tip of the iceberg. Americans are dealing with privacy in every aspect of their lives. We deal with it in cybersecurity. We deal with it in issues that aren't getting fully addressed. And here we're dealing with privacy of American citizens with respect to their government. In every instance, the citizen, it's your data. You should be in control of who accesses your data. And in this case, under the premise of Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the government is taking that data. And it's very important to do that for national security reasons for foreigners. And incidentally, many pieces of data are collected about Americans. And so rather than a more aggressive system to say we're just deleting. We could write automation that would say, since this is about an American, it's just deleted, it's discarded. This is a bipartisan compromise that keeps the data collected. It provides a way for the government to search this information should they need to. But the missing link is we need a warrant. The Fourth Amendment does not have an asterisk by it. The Fourth Amendment is not meant to be abridged by this act. And Amash's amendment in this bipartisan compromise is a step in the right direction towards preserving the Fourth Amendment. So I fully support it.
Thanks, Rep. Davidson, and I'd like to welcome Rep. Sanford.
Everything's been said, but let me just add 2 observations. One, at a time in Washington when people believe that bipartisanship is impossible, I think it's telling, as Representative Jordan just pointed out, that you have not only a bipartisan group, but a bicameral group in support of this particular measure. The second point I'd make is this, which is liberty without civil liberty isn't liberty. I mean, fundamentally what joins this group is recognition of that fact. Our founding fathers recognized that fact when they built in the Fourth Amendment and its appropriate safeguards. And so I just think, you know, there's been a long tug of war in the history of our civilization with liberty on one side and freedom on the other. I don't know if you all have seen the Ken Burns special on Vietnam, but it's telling about, again, exactly what Representative Jordan was getting at with the abuses at the IRS or the Justice Department or FBI or others, on a healthy skepticism that should exist within the American society as to governmental power. I'd finally make this observation, which is, in 1776, Edward Gibbons wrote a book chronicling the fall of the Roman Empire. And in it, he harkens actually back to the fall of the Athenians. And he talked about how, in the end, more than they wanted freedom, they wanted security, and as a consequence, lost it all. I think we're at a telling tipping point in our own civilization.
Thanks, Rep. Sanford. And now welcome Rep. Garrett.
America is clamoring for bipartisanship in a city that seems to be fueled by hyperbole and vitriol. Ladies and gentlemen, here it is. The FISA stands for the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and I would submit that if we do not put the F back in FISA, it becomes ISA, and the American public should know that the eyes are on them. In one short year, this body has attacked health care problems, tax cuts, we've eviscerated ISIS, and I would submit that this is the single most important piece of legislation that's occurred since I've been here. And here's why. We've had a number of members from both sides of the aisle discuss the fact that this implicates the very meaning and essence and import of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. I would submit that due process, be it Fifth Amendment or 14th Amendment, is tangentially also swept up in that process. So 3 amendments to the Constitution are essentially under attack, and we do not need to speculate as to what will happen because in 2015, the Washington Post reported that the communications of members of Congress were swept up in foreign intelligence surveillance wiretapping of Israeli targets. So it isn't something that's hypothetical, it's already happened, but it isn't about Congress, it's about the American people. It's about fundamental ideals that undergird who we are as a nation. It's about the Fourth Amendment. It is, I would argue, tangentially about the Fifth and 14th Amendment. It is about the nature of the rights of citizens in a country that calls itself free. And so while during my tenure as a prosecutor, I was known as relentless and hard-charging, and while I understand the import of the tools of law enforcement, I think it's important to quote a person far more intelligent than myself who suggested that those who would sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither and will lose both. It is an honor to stand next to these ladies and gentlemen from both sides of the aisle in both chambers to defend the undergirding principles that make us American.
Thanks, Rep. Garrett. And we've had some other members who have joined us here, and if any of them want to add anything, happy to have you come up now, and if not. So we've, so I want to thank all of my colleagues for their support on this amendment. I want to thank especially Senator Wyden and Senator Paul for really getting this moving by introducing it in the Senate. And we have a real opportunity here to get this passed in the House tomorrow. We need to pass this amendment. We need to protect people's rights. And I want to thank all of the bipartisan co-sponsors of the amendment. We have a lot of people who aren't here who are co-sponsors of the amendment. I've never had a situation where it was so easy to get co-sponsors, frankly. I went and talked to people about this amendment, and co-sponsors came flying in. We have over 40 co-sponsors that we gathered in a very short period of time. So we've got a lot of support. I want to thank all the members who are standing with us in defense of the Constitution and defense of people's rights. And with that, we'll open up for some questions. Thank you.
Hi, this is to Senator Wyden and Paul. If the House doesn't pass the Amash Amendment, what will you guys do to try to stop that House bill as it stands now?
Well, first of all, we think that this is a very fluid situation. I mean, we're picking up more and more political support every day. That's why you see the breadth of this caucus. I mean, people want security and liberty. And I think as the country learns that these Intelligence Committee bills, are fake reform. In other words, they've made a little change here and a little change there, but they are business as usual fake reform proposals, the intelligence bills in both the House and the Senate. That's why, and Congressman Amash and I were just talking about it, you see in the House trotting out all of these far-fetched arguments against what Congressman Amash and Congresswoman Lofgren are trying to do. They say we're empowering terrorists. None of these bills, none of them, give more rights to terrorists. They say, well, we're not going to be able to prosecute dangerous crimes. I've sat on the Intelligence Committee for 17 years. I haven't once heard the government say that the FISA bill, and Senator Paul has mentioned this eloquently, I've never heard the government say it needed to use FISA to prosecute those kind of crimes. So I think the intelligence committees are pretty rattled here. And they have seen, I want to commend Congressman Jordan, he's mobilized the Freedom Caucus. The fact that Congressman Nadler came in here on a busy day certainly sends a strong message to progressives. I think this is something of a defining moment in this FISA debate. I'm sort of the Methuselah of this operation here. I've been on this issue for like 6 years, and we've struggled even to get, as Senator Paul mentioned, data about the number of Americans getting swept up. What we know for sure, though, is the number is increasing. And the reason why is because as communications around the world increasingly are globally interconnected, you're going to have more law-abiding Americans get swept up. So that was why Congressman Liu's point was so important. I mean, here's a military man. There was no ambiguity in what he said. He said, when you're talking about a threat to Americans on foreign soil, he's prepared to do what it takes to protect America. This is about law-abiding Americans. So what we're going to do is keep mobilizing, and at the rate we pick up support based on the last few weeks, Congressman Paul and I used to joke we could meet in a phone booth. We never had a meeting like this. The cross-section of the Senate and the House, it's terrific. You're on.
You're done. All right. Very quickly on the reform bill out of the committee in the House, it's actually worse than the existing law. In one way, it actually codifies that they can use this information on domestic crime. This information that's gathered at a less than constitutional standard or with no constitutional standard can be used for domestic crime. So the reform they have is worse. I think it's 6 years for the next review of it. That's way too long. That's essentially no oversight. Our chances in the Senate, the chances are better in the House, frankly, but a victory in the House will spur and encourage some people in the Senate to come along. In the Senate, to prevent them from having sort of permanent reauthorization, we need 41 votes. You know, you need 60 to actually get to passage. But it's a big, huge first step, and I think it's great that the House is going first. I think the privacy movement is stronger in the House than the Senate, but maybe we'll learn something from you guys.
I've asked Senator Wyden this question, so I won't direct it at him again. But for you, Senator Paul, you've drawn a red line at a permanent or long-term extension, but you haven't drawn a red line at any particular policy area. Would you be willing to filibuster a bill on the Senate floor that didn't say include a warrant requirement that was 4 to 7 years long?
Yes, it has to have a warrant requirement, and really the information that's gathered with a less than constitutional standard should not be used in domestic crime.
And you're willing to filibuster that?
Yes.
I don't know if any of you have said this in public, but have any of you been swept up? Have you asked the intelligence community if that has occurred, and can you talk about it publicly?
I mean, the Intelligence Committee rules are you cannot talk about committee deliberations or what you learn in the room.
Thank you, Martin Matashek with Politico. Quick question, if the two chambers are unable to get on the same page by the 19th, what is the appetite here in the room for another short-term extension of 60 days, 90 days, a year?
Under the existing FISA law, it specifies if there is an order, that order remains in effect even if the underlying law has expired. There is a FISA order that goes through April, and so even if we were, for example, not able to pass the Amash amendment tomorrow and to defeat the bill, the order would remain in place through April. So they would not go dark. So knowing that, we do have some capacity to work through these issues.
Also, just to add to that, it's not like we didn't see this deadline coming up. They've extended it once. They may try to extend it again. But the point is, the House here, and I'm sure the Senate works the same way, they wait to the last second on everything. And this is something that is critically important. This is one of, if not the most important issue I've worked on while a member of Congress. And yet they wait and wait and wait. We didn't even know for sure that we were going to be having this debate this week until just before this week. That's crazy. We should be debating this for months and months and having a discussion with the American people and having a conversation with each other. When we were talking in our Republican conference meeting, you have the leadership team come up and filibuster for a whole bunch of time. And then at the end of the meeting, we get only a few minutes to discuss this. And I can tell you that most members of Congress don't know enough about the issue because it's technical in many ways. And we could benefit from a long, thorough debate and discussion and meetings, but we haven't had that. So it's on our leadership team. If they want to get this done the right way, let's have all of those meetings. Let's have all of those discussions. Because I guarantee you, if we have those meetings and discussions, more members of Congress will support the USA Rights Act. More members of Congress will be opposed to what they're doing in the underlying bill. More members of Congress will stand with us. Because when you ask a member of Congress, do you think that the government should be able to collect and search and use information on Americans without a warrant? Almost every single one, I'll bet there's a couple that won't say, yeah, but almost every single one will say, no, that's totally unacceptable, it's unconstitutional. But they put this bill in place, this underlying bill, and they tell people it has a warrant requirement when it doesn't really have a warrant requirement. It has a requirement that would apply in so few cases that it's basically not a requirement at all. So we should be real with our colleagues, and we should be real with American people about what's going on and have a real discussion.
The crisis,
Rep. Thomas Massey.
Thank you. The crisis is a crisis of the leadership and the intelligence community's making. Nobody here is late to the party. We've been working on this for years. Twice in the appropriations process, Zoe Lofgren and Ted Poe and Justin Amash and I have passed an amendment to deal with this issue, to impose a warrant requirement or to withhold funding for that part of the intelligence surveillance unless there's a warrant requirement. Twice that's passed the House. Twice they stripped it from the omnibus because they said, now is not the time, now is not the place in the context of a spending bill to deal with this.
So then we had another opportunity to deal with this in the Freedom Act. When the Patriot Act came up for renewal, we said, okay, now is the time. Let's deal with this. We have a constitutional crisis here in the FISA program. And at the Rules Committee, they said, nope, now is not the time. And so we have been persistent and consistent about this warrant requirement. Twice it's passed the House. We know this amendment can pass the House because twice it already has. And to the extent there is a crisis of a deadline here, it's of their making, not ours. We didn't flag this problem lately. Senator Wyden flagged this problem years ago.
All right, with that, I want to just say thank you to everyone, and see you today and tomorrow. Thanks.